Welcome to Beyond Fortune, where love stories are born in the most unlikely places and truly change destinies. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share this with anyone who loves emotional narratives. Now, picture this. You offer your last drink to a stranger in a crowded nightclub. He thanks you with a shy smile, disappears into the crowd, and you move on with your life. But he wasn't just another face on the dance floor. He was the owner of the club, and that simple gesture is about to rewrite everything you thought you knew about love, presence, and truth. Ready? Let's begin. The club's bass throbbed like an electric heartbeat hidden beneath the sidewalk. Inside, neon lights sliced through the dark in shades of blue and magenta. Ice clinked in tall glasses. Conversations collided like sparks. Florence leaned against the bar, pockets empty, courage cracked. It was the end of her shift and the last drink she could afford that night. A Lower East Side club, line at the door, bouncers nodding you're good. She took a deep breath and smiled to herself, as if she'd survived one more day. In the darkest corner, a man sat alone, watching the floor without dancing. Nothing flashy on him, just a black coat and a polite silence. He blended into the furniture, one of those details no one notices. Florence spotted his empty glass, the hesitation in his fingers, the distance in his eyes. She remembered nights when she had nothing to raise a toast with either. She slid her own glass toward him, club soda with lime. On the house. "It's my last one," she said with a soft laugh. "And you look like you need it more." The man lifted his gaze slowly, as if returning from far away. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice low, almost drowned by the music. "I am," she replied, drumming her short nails against the bar. "Think of it as an investment in karma, Mr. Stranger." He accepted, touching the glass gently, as if it carried a secret. "Thank you," he said, sincere in a way without polish. "No worries," she shot back. "It's just club soda, nothing epic." The bartender raised an eyebrow and handed her a clean napkin. Florence winked at him like an old regular of cheap happy hours. The man breathed in the citrus sting and took half in one sip. He made a surprised face of good memory, like tasting himself again. "It's more honest than whiskey," he said, and she nodded in agreement. "Honesty's rare around here," she commented, eyes on the spinning crowd. "Maybe that's why you notice it when it shows up," he replied. "Florence," she introduced herself, hand out with tired humor. "Theo," he said, choosing a nickname that fit the anonymity. "Pleasure, Theo from the dark corner," she smiled, fingering her empty glass. "You live around here, or just lost track of your own night?" "Close enough to walk when I need to think," he said. "A packed club is perfect for anyone who wants to hide," she teased. He chuckled, short, agreeing with the efficiency of noise. The DJ switched the BPM, and the floor turned into a sea of arms. A mirrored ball spilled, stars onto anonymous shoulders. Florence pointed at the lights like vegan fireworks. "People come here to forget the day and remember what they feel." "And why did you come?" he asked, genuinely curious. "Because I still believe in Friday night miracles," she said. "And because a club has chairs and rent doesn't." "Forgive." His phone buzzed insistently, but he flipped it face down. Florence noticed no wedding ring, hands of someone who decided without posing. "No midnight messages tonight," she teased lightly. "Nothing that can't wait," he said, eyes on her instead of the screen. "You talk like someone who owns their own time," she joked. "Tonight, I'm just obeying the honesty of your club soda," he said. She laughed loud, and the sound seemed to rearrange the room. "What do you do, Florence?" he asked, leaning on the bar. "I work at a record store and take shifts at a cafe," she said. "Soundtracks by day, caffeine by night, bills always." "And you, Theo?" she asked back, curious but polite. He spun the glass, searching for an answer that wouldn't betray him. "I manage problems and celebrate solutions," he said, half smiling. "Chaos consultant." She guessed, and they toasted midair. A girl bumped past, muttering a rushed "my bad." The bartender refilled ice. The light turned amber. Music climbed. "I've got one last drink voucher," Florence admitted. "But I think I'd rather save it for the next time I need it." "Or for the next time someone else does," he replied. "You learn fast, Theo," she said, approving like a teacher. "I listen," he answered, simple as stating truth. Across the room, a VIP table popped champagne in a cascade of flashes. Looks like a championship final, but it's just foam, Florence remarked. Sometimes it's just to remind the world they exist, Theo said. You talk like someone who's been in there, she noted. Half a second of silence confessed more than words. Maybe I've looked too closely before, he admitted, and decided the corner has a better view. A security guard strolled past, steady as a metronome. Theo greeted him with a tiny nod, almost invisible. Florence caught it, but didn't understand the recognition in the man's eyes. Are you somebody around here? She asked, half laughing. Just a regular customer, he deflected, clutching the napkin. She hummed, filing the clue away without judgment. Your secret, not mine. What's the best concert you've ever seen? He asked, changing the subject. Springsteen at Giants Stadium, she answered without pause. Rain, raspy voice, and everyone singing like it was home. And yours? She asked, just as curious. An outdoor show, whispers turning into a choir, he said. I think I love when a crowd decides to be family for one night. Makes sense, she said, and for a moment the club felt like church. The neon clock blinked lazily at 2 a.m. Florence felt her body remind her of the cafe shift in the morning. I should go, subway waits for no one, she warned. May I walk you to the corner? Theo asked with respect. To the corner, she agreed, nodding toward the door. The cold air bit their skin as they stepped out, city breathing steam. Sleepy taxis yawned headlights across the avenue. The street was damp, smelling of rain that never fell. Neon signs blinked like tired promises. Florence tugged her coat tight, collar brushing her chin. Thanks for not turning this into small talk, she said. I like conversations without receipts, he answered with low humor. So what was this then? She teased, stopping at the corner. It was a reminder, he said, that kindness changes entire shifts. Do you always talk pretty? She laughed, leaning against the pole. Not always. Tonight it worked, he admitted, a bit shy. I've got nothing to give you but my last sip, she said. And that was plenty, he replied, tapping his chest. Ever notice how lime water saves bad nights? And so do honest people, he added, not looking at his feet. The crosswalk light pinged green. I have a request, he said, before she crossed. If I show up again, will you offer me the first sip? If you show up, I'll offer the ice, she teased. Deal, he said, and something flickered at his mouth's corner. See you, Theo from the dark corner. See you, Florence who gave the last. She raised her hand in a goodbye that felt like a promise. He stood there, watching her silhouette fade in the glow of a shop window. The wind tugged the napkin from his pocket, but he caught it in time. Folded there, a lime stain perfumed the memory. The club growled inside, summoning another round of stories. Theo looked at the marquee, the street, his own decision. Not every owner can stay anonymous for long, he thought. But tonight, he chose to be just the man who received a gesture. Florence descended the subway steps, shoelace brushing the stair edge. The train screeched in, spitting sparks of fatigue. She leaned against the door, eyes closed, music still in her body. She thought of the stranger with kind words and decent silence. She wondered what kind of story someone carried who chose the shadows. She smiled to herself, like finding a bill in an old coat pocket. Let it be light, she whispered, and the city answered with rails. Backstage, the club manager scrolled through a spreadsheet on his tablet. Would you like to review the VIP list, Mr. Theodore? He asked over the phone. Outside, Theo drew a long breath and pocketed the device. His full name weighed too heavy in the cold air. Not yet, he thought, saving the truth for another time. For now, he'd keep the secret like a rare note folded away. Tomorrow, maybe, he would choose where to sit. The night closed its tabs, the city folding into reduced light. On the Lower East Side, someone swept invisible confetti from the floor. One sign turned off, another flickered, another promised a restart. Florence headed home with the sense she had chosen right. Theo stayed on the corner, listening to the echo of a different thank you. Two worlds awake, stitched together by a simple glass with lime. And a new question beating in each chest. What if? The morning sun filtered through the broken blinds of Florence's small apartment. She woke to the sound of her phone alarm and the memory of the club still pulsing in her ears. The kitchen was tiny, a round table with 2 chairs and the smell of reheated coffee. On top of the fridge, a pile of bills waited their turn to be ignored. Florence sighed deeply, pulling her coat tight around her shoulders. It was time to face another day of rushing, like all the others. Life allowed no long pauses, much less expensive dreams. The record store where she worked in the mornings, customers were few. Stacks of vinyl records told stories of decades she hadn't lived. "Morning, Flo," said the owner, a kind old man who treated the store like a sanctuary. She smiled, reorganizing jazz and classic rock albums. There, time seemed to move slower, carried by the crackle of the turntable. It was her slice of peace before the marathon of coffee and trays. But even among colorful covers, she remembered the stranger from the night before, Theo. The name repeated in her mind like a chorus. She didn't know why she'd opened up so much to him. Maybe because he hadn't tried to impress her, only listened. And for someone used to being invisible in crowds, that was rare. She straightened the shelf of vinyls and smiled to herself, like keeping a secret. "Are you in love with records or with memories?" the owner teased. Florence blushed and looked away, hiding the truth even from herself. Across the city, Theodore's morning looked very different. He woke in a glass penthouse with a view of Manhattan. Breakfast was prepared by a private chef, yet almost untouched. The conference table already awaited him with contracts, figures, and investors. He descended the spiral stairs, tie impeccable, but eyes weary. Discreet bodyguards followed him like shadows that never left. Every step was scheduled, every decision worth millions. In the conference room, screens displayed profit charts and projections. The club made 12% more this quarter, a manager reported. Theodore only nodded, without enthusiasm. While everyone spoke of numbers, his mind drifted back to the bar the night before. The memory of a simple drink offered without expectation. The way Florence spoke of small miracles, as if she believed in them. It felt more real than any number on a spreadsheet. "Mr. Lancaster, are you with us?" an investor asked. Theo lifted his eyes, uncomfortable at being caught distracted. "Yes, go on," he answered, though his voice sounded far away. Truth was, he couldn't stop asking himself, when was the last time someone looked at him without an agenda? The answer hurt, maybe never. And that's why that night wouldn't leave his mind. Back in Queens, Florence closed her shift at the store. She caught the packed subway, squeezed between backpacks and cheap cologne. The tunnel lights flickered as if the city itself were tired. On her lap, she held a used book she'd bought at a discount. She loved reading during commutes, even with the noise around her. It was her way of escaping suffocating routine. But this time, the words blurred with memories of his smile. The cafe where she worked afternoons was already buzzing. Orders of double latte and Americano no sugar echoed in rushed English. Florence moved quickly, balancing cups and trays. With every pause, she breathed deep to keep exhaustion from showing. It was a life of double shifts and tips that barely covered the bills. But unlike many, she still smiled at customers. She believed kindness could transform days, the way hers had been transformed. Meanwhile, Theo reviewed schedules in his private office. His phone buzzed with invitations to galas and social gatherings. But none of them seemed to matter. What mattered was the strange urge to return to the club, not as the owner, not as the host, but as the man in the corner. The man she called Theo, not Theodore Lancaster. The man who could drink a club soda without becoming news. That night, Florence walked home. The streets of Queens smelled of cheap pizza, steam escaping the manholes. She adjusted her headphones, listening to an old playlist that warmed her heart. She passed colorful graffiti splashed across gray walls. She sighed, tired but grateful to have survived another day. Theo's face returned to her memory like a daydream intruding. "Will I ever see him again?" she murmured, not expecting an answer. Theo, in his penthouse, stared at the city through the glass. Below, thousands of lives crossed paths without knowing who he was. And he, with all his fortune, felt lonelier than ever. Yet, there was an invisible thread pulling him out of that golden cage. A thread named Florence, who had given her last drink without asking for anything. He closed his eyes, smiling for the first time in days. Maybe it was time to go back to the club, not as an owner, but as a man. Florence switched off the lights of her tiny room and lay down. The city stayed alive outside, horns and sirens carrying the night. She hugged her pillow and let her mind wander. She thought of Theo as if he were a character in a book she read slowly. A stranger who felt closer than he should. And still, part Part of her hoped this wasn't the last page. She smiled before falling asleep. Not knowing the story had only begun, Florence woke early on Sunday, trying to savor her rare day off. She made simple coffee, opened the window, and let New York's chill in. In the quiet morning, she reflected on the small things that sustained her. A warm cup, a good song, a forgotten book on the shelf. Yet Theo's presence slipped between the pages of her thoughts. She didn't know where this sudden curiosity came from. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was something else. Meanwhile, Theodore sat in a meeting with lawyers. They spoke of contracts, taxes, and future acquisitions. He listened, but his mind drifted back to that night at the bar. Her gesture, so simple, so unpretentious, still disarmed him. It was rare for anyone not to treat him as Mr. Lancaster, or as an asset. She treated him like no one else, just a man who was thirsty, and that detail felt more valuable than every contract on the table. Florence decided to take a walk around the neighborhood. She stepped into a small secondhand bookstore. She loved the smell of old paper, covers worn with time. She picked a used novel, filled with a stranger's notes in the margins. She liked imagining stories within the story. As she flipped the pages, Theo's voice returned to her mind. "I listen," he had said. Simple words, hard to find. Theo, meanwhile, wandered the halls of his club, now empty. It was too early to open, and the spotlights were off. He walked among tables still covered with white cloths. Staff cleaned discreetly, avoiding his eyes. He stopped at the bar, the very spot where Florence had stood. He looked at the glass still there, forgotten from the night before. He smiled to himself, as if that detail were a secret trophy. Florence returned home with the book tucked under her arm. At the kitchen table, her aunt waited with hot tea. They spoke about life, bills, and an uncertain future. But Florence kept the memory of the night before to herself. It was a fragment she didn't yet know how to name. How could she explain that a stranger felt closer than friends she'd had for years? She chose silence, though her heart disobeyed. Theo turned on the television in his penthouse, but didn't pay attention. Images of businessmen and politics flashed by. His name appeared in captions about corporate mergers, but none of it mattered, as much as Florence's laughter. He picked up his phone, hesitated to look for her number, then realized he didn't have it, and smiled with irony. Maybe it was better this way. Fate would do its part. That night, Florence dreamed of the club. The lights, the music, the glass sliding across the bar. Theo appeared as a bright shadow, half real, half imagined. The dream made her wake with a heavy sigh. She didn't know if it was a warning or a memory, but she felt things weren't over yet. Something inside told her their reunion was inevitable. Theo, on the other hand, couldn't sleep. He stayed on the balcony, staring at the glowing city. He thought of how many people went unnoticed every day, and how, that night, a simple woman had seen the man behind the name. He held the folded napkin still tucked in his coat pocket. Just a piece of paper, yet it felt like proof of a second chance. And he wasn't willing to let it slip away so easily. The club boiled on an ordinary Friday, but for Florence it was just another long shift. She'd agreed to cover her friend at the bar, even though it wasn't her main job. Between glass tumblers and rushed orders, her body felt heavy with fatigue. The electronic music made the floor vibrate under her feet, like a second heartbeat. She was wiping down the counter when a familiar face emerged from the shadows. Theo was there, in the same corner, with the same quiet as before. A shiver ran down her spine, half surprise, half curiosity. Florence pretended not to notice at first. She didn't want to seem eager or, worse, too interested. But every time she looked up, he was already looking. It wasn't invasive, attentive, almost grateful. When he finally stepped closer, she joked, "Did you come to collect on the club soda debt?" Theo smiled, discreet, and said, "Actually, I came to return the favor." He set 2 glasses of water with lime on the counter. The gesture pulled an unexpected laugh from her. "You're learning fast, Theo," she said, taking the glass. "I only learn from good teachers," he replied, eyes steady on hers. The simplicity of the exchange made the music softer, the room less suffocating. For a few minutes, there was no crowd or flashes, just 2 strangers at the bar. She wondered what brought him back, on the same night of the week. He wondered whether he'd have the courage to show up without a mask. "Do you always come alone?" she asked, drying. "The counter. Almost always. I like to listen to stories that aren't mine. Stories or secrets? She teased. Sometimes they're the same thing, he said, a little enigmatic. Florence tilted her head, intrigued, but smiled. Then you picked the right place. Everyone comes here to hide something. He nodded, as if he understood more than he said. The night rolled on, and the pressure at the bar kept climbing. Florence moved like a machine, but her eyes kept finding him. Theo stayed there, unrushed, as if he had all the time in the world. It struck her. No one in that club seemed to have time. Don't you get tired of just watching? She asked, curious. Sometimes silence is where we find answers, he said. The words echoed in her, because that was exactly what she sought. In the middle of the crowd, a staffer approached Theo discreetly. Mr. Lancaster, everything is under control, he whispered, barely audible. Florence didn't hear, but she clocked the way Theo nodded. Something in his posture, a respect not given to just any customer. She logged the scene and saved the question for later. Theo realized he'd let a piece of the truth slip, and it made him restless, even more exposed. When dawn dragged its feet, the bar was buried in empty bottles. Florence took off her apron, exhausted, and grabbed a glass of water. Theo was still there, as if he'd been waiting for the right moment. You don't seem like you're from here, she said plainly. Maybe because I'm not, he answered, honest but only halfway. Then why do you keep coming back? She asked, unblinking. He drew a breath. Because here I can be just Theo. Her reply was a silence heavy with questions. It was like standing before someone who ran from his own reflection. You talk like someone with a lot to hide, she said. Or a lot to lose, he corrected. Florence bit her lip, trying to read him. But something in his sincerity kept her from judging. Deep down, she felt seen in a way no one else saw her. The clock slipped toward 3 a.m., and the dance floor began to thin. Florence was gathering glasses when Theo came up again. May I walk you to the corner? He repeated from the first night. She smirked. This is becoming a habit, huh? A good one, he said, reaching for his coat. They slipped out the side door, avoiding the noise at the main entrance. The cold pre-dawn air wrapped around them like a secret. They walked in silence for a few blocks. The city felt different at that hour, truer, less chaotic. Traffic lights blinked over nearly empty streets. You never really answer what you do, she said. Theo laughed, eyes on the ground. Maybe because I still don't know what I am. And who are you with me? Florence asked, stopping on the sidewalk. Just a man lucky enough to get an unexpected drink, he said. She studied him for a few seconds, searching for contradictions. All she found was vulnerability, tucked behind resolve. It was as if he carried an invisible weight. And here, he was free. Then keep being just Theo, she said, starting to walk again. He smiled, warmth spreading in his chest like it hadn't in years. The city seemed less cold that dawn, and the way to the corner had never felt so short. Florence boarded the subway, still feeling his presence. The sway of the train blended with the echo of their talk. Just Theo. She repeated it in her mind, testing a new word. She knew there was more there, but she wasn't in a hurry to find it. It was strange to trust so quickly someone she barely knew. But somehow, it didn't feel wrong. It felt inevitable. Theo went home, but didn't turn on the penthouse lights. He sat in the dark, watching the city sleep. He still had the folded napkin she'd given him tucked in his pocket. It was ridiculous, but it meant more than any contract. For the first time in years, he felt someone saw past his last name. And that scared him and pulled him in at once. He knew he couldn't hide forever. As Florence fell asleep in her small room in Queens, she dreamed of the club. Not the lights or the music, but the empty table where he always sat. That dark corner had taken on meaning. It was a place where two worlds crossed without asking permission. She woke with a shy smile, surprised by her own heart, and realized she did hope to see him again, even if she didn't want to admit it. Theo, for his part, woke up resolved. He couldn't go on as a shadow in the club. If he wanted to remain in her life, he'd have to risk more. But part of him still feared the truth would destroy everything. Just Theo was what she accepted, but how long could he hide the rest? The answer would come sooner than he imagined. Florence got home and tossed her coat on the chair. The club scent still clung to her hair, smoke, and expensive perfume. She sat on the narrow bed, hugging her knees, replaying every word Theo had said. There was nothing extraordinary about him. Maybe that was exactly the pull. A man who listened, who refused to play the game of appearances. Just Theo, she murmured, as if savoring a secret. And for the first time in a long while, she fell asleep smiling. Theo, in his penthouse, couldn't switch his mind off. The city glittered below like an endless board of lights. But among billions of bulbs, only one memory truly glowed. Florence's laugh, simple, unforced, clung to him. Leaning against the glass, he wondered if he was playing with fire. If she learned who he really was, would she accept that quiet? Or see just another powerful man pretending to be ordinary? In the days that followed, Florence slipped back into her usual rhythm. Record store, cafe, bills, subway, repeat. But something was different, an invisible thread tying her to the club. She'd pass certain streets and wonder if he'd be there. Again, the city felt less cold with the possibility. And though she wouldn't admit it, she found herself choosing less worn blouses. Not to impress him, but not to hide. Theo changed his routine, too. Meetings, investors, obligations felt less urgent. He'd stare at his calendar for hours, cutting social commitments without regret. His world revolved around deadlines, but now there was an unexpected detour. A detour named Florence, who had offered her last drink without asking for anything. He knew he couldn't live as just Theo forever. But for now, he let himself be only that, and nothing more. The club was more crowded than ever that night. It was the venue's 10-year anniversary, and everyone wanted to be there. Florence balanced trays and glasses, trying not to get lost in the crowd. The lights pulsed like a racing heart, bouncing off mirrored walls. In his usual corner, Theo was back, calm posture in the middle of chaos. Florence smiled when she saw him, but noticed something was different. Too many people were looking at him, as if they recognized him. Theo ordered a water with lime, the ritual that already bound them. She served it, trying to ignore the stares around them. "Busy tonight," she said, aiming for casual. "It's a special night," he replied, offering no detail. Florence raised an eyebrow, suspicious. "You sound like someone who knows more than he's saying." He looked away, stirring his glass in silence. At the bar, a group of businessmen toasted with champagne. One of them glanced at Theo and lifted his glass in respect. "Good evening, Mr. Lancaster," he said, loud enough to be heard. Florence froze for a moment, absorbing that name. Theo only nodded, as if trying to dull the impact. But it was too late. The mask was beginning to slip. Her heart raced, trying to process what she'd just heard. She drifted to the other side of the counter, pretending to arrange glasses. Theo noticed and tried to catch her eye, but failed. Florence repeated the name silently, Lancaster. She'd seen it in headlines, in business articles. A surname tied to wealth, to luxury hotels. It couldn't be coincidence. The man who called himself just Theo was, in fact, much more. When the rush at the bar slowed, she returned to his corner. "So, Lancaster?" she asked, no softness in her tone. Theo breathed deeply, his eyes pleading for understanding. "I just wanted to be Theo, at least with you." Florence folded her arms, feeling deceived. "And I've been just Florence. This whole time. You never said a word." He lowered his head, recognizing the truth in her words. "I didn't want you to see me the way everyone else does," he said honestly. "So you'd rather I saw nothing at all?" she shot back. The loud music seemed to mock the silence between them. She pulled away, serving other customers with trembling hands. Theo stayed put, feeling the distance widen. No contract could fix this. For the first time, he had no control over what was happening. Later, during her break, Florence stepped out into the side alley. The night air hit her, clearing her mind in fragments. She leaned against the brick wall, breathing deeply. "I should have guessed," she muttered, recalling the signs. The staff's respect, the discreet glances, his calm presence. Now it all made sense, but it hurt. She felt the trust had been broken. Theo appeared moments later, clutching his coat against the wind. "Mia," he stopped, correcting himself. "Florence, listen." She raised a hand, demanding silence. "You lied by omission, Theo. This isn't just about money." "I didn't lie. I just wanted to breathe away from it all." "And I was the convenient hiding place?" she asked bitterly. He stepped closer, but she backed away. "You were the only one who saw me without that name stuck to my face." The words left him like a plea. "And you think that makes up for the secret?" He swallowed hard, staring at the damp ground of the alley. "I thought it did, but I understand if you don't feel the same." The silence between them weighed like lead. Florence looked up at the sky, as if searching for strength. The distant city noises echoed into the empty alley. Police sirens, car horns, laughter from passing strangers. But here, there were only two worlds colliding. She wanted to believe him, but her heart resisted. I don't know who you really are, Theo. Or should I say Theodore? He closed his eyes at the sound of his full name. It felt more like a sentence than an identity. The next day, Florence told her aunt about the revelation. The older woman sighed, pouring strong coffee at the table. Do you like him? She asked simply. Florence hesitated, but couldn't deny it. But I don't know if I can trust him. Trust is built in the mess, not in order, her aunt said. The words echoed in Florence's mind the rest of the day. Theo, in his penthouse, stared at the morning papers. One headline highlighted his presence at the club. Lancaster celebrates anniversary of his own nightclub. To the world, it was just another social event. But for him, it was the night he almost lost her. He sank onto the couch, weary of his own image. He wished only to go back to being the man with the club soda. Florence went to work, trying to ignore the heaviness in her chest. She served customers at the cafe with her usual smile. But inside, she was at war with her memories. Theo didn't seem like a liar, but he didn't seem trustworthy either. The contradiction wore her down. I can't lose myself in someone like this, she repeated silently. But her stubborn heart refused to obey. That night, the club felt different. Florence avoided looking at the corner where he usually sat. And yet, part of her hoped he would be there. Theo didn't show up, and that hurt more than she'd admit. The emptiness in the corner seemed to accuse her for missing him. She sighed, serving another round of drinks. Maybe this was for the best, she thought, but didn't believe it. Theo, for his part, stayed away knowing she needed space. He spent the night alone. No music, no crowd, no disguise. He paced his apartment like a stranger in his own home. The glass walls reflected. A man who didn't want to be seen. He remembered her words. Was I just the convenient hiding place? The weight of guilt pressed heavy on his chest. And he realized he'd need to prove himself, not just speak. That night, Florence wrote in her notebook before bed. He isn't just Theo. He's Theodore Lancaster. But why? Even knowing that, do I still feel like I want to believe him? She closed the notebook, hiding the secret between the pages. In that moment, she knew she was trapped between two worlds, one of distrust and one of hope. And sooner or later, she would have to choose. Theo spent the week avoiding headlines and events. He canceled social meetings, declined lavish invitations. But he couldn't reject the memory of Florence. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw her smile at the bar. Every time he tried to sleep, he remembered the lime in the club soda. It was a reminder that someone had truly seen him. And he couldn't bear the thought of losing that. Florence, meanwhile, felt torn. Part of her wanted to never cross paths with him again. But another part longed for the reunion, for answers. She missed the simple conversations, the unexpected words. It was as if Theo had left behind a void no one else could fill. And the more she tried to deny it, the clearer it became. Her heart had already made the choice her mind feared. The rumors began as quiet whispers in the club. She's only with him for the money, some clients said. Florence heard the murmurs while serving drinks, pretending indifference. But each word was a stone hurled against her heart. She had never chased status, never run after wealth. All she wanted was to survive and, maybe, find something real. Now she was being judged for a love she wasn't even sure existed. Theo noticed the change in her eyes. Her smiles no longer carried lightness, only a silent weight. He tried to reach her, but Florence had pulled into layers. Are you okay? He asked one night. I'm fine. Just tired, she answered, avoiding his gaze. But her eyes screamed the truth. She was hurt, not only by him, but by the world around them. At the cafe, her co-workers chatted about the headlines. A local magazine had published a photo of her beside Theo. Mystery solved. The magnate Lancaster's new companion. Florence nearly dropped her tray when she heard the title. Her colleagues' laughter wasn't cruel, but filled with curiosity. Flo, you should be happy. It's like in the movies. She only forced a smile, swallowing the shame. That night, Florence walked to the neighborhood park. She sat on a bench, staring at Manhattan's distant lights. She felt too small against such an immense world. I didn't choose this, she whispered to herself. The cold wind tossed her hair, but she didn't move. It was as if she were waiting for the city to answer her. But silence was the only companion she received. Theo, in his penthouse, also stared at the city. He knew the rumors were hurting Florence, but he didn't know how to mend the pain without invading her life further. If I speak, she'll think I'm controlling, he thought. If I stay silent, she'll think I don't care. It was a trap with no way out, built by the world he lived in. And he hated being caged by his own glass walls. He decided to find her at the cafe where she worked. He walked in quietly. In a simple suit, his expression tired. The customers whispered, but he ignored them. When Florence saw him, her heart raced. "You shouldn't have come here," she said softly. "I needed to see you outside the club," he replied. She sighed. Setting her apron down on the counter, they went to a nearby square in silence. Dry leaves crunched beneath their steps as they walked. Theo finally broke it. "I'm sorry for what's happening." Florence stopped, arms crossed. "It's not just that." "Then tell me what it is," he asked sincerely. She drew a deep breath, her chest burning. "It's about trusting someone who lives behind masks." He stayed silent, because he couldn't deny it. "I just wanted to be seen without the weight of my name," he said. "And I just wanted to be seen as more than a rumor," she shot back. Her words cut like a sharp blade. Theo tried to step closer, but she stepped back. "Don't protect me with silence, Theo. Your silence hurts more than the rumors." The wind gusted strong, carrying the sound of sirens in the distance. Florence felt like she was waging war against something invisible. Theo watched her, torn between explaining and respecting. "I don't know how to do this right," he confessed. "Neither do I," she answered, her eyes brimming. "But the difference is I have nothing to lose. And you have the whole world watching." For a moment, their eyes locked. It was as if they both stood bare before the truth. "Do you think I'm with you for your money?" she asked. "No," he answered instantly, without hesitation. "Then why don't you trust me enough to be honest?" He closed his eyes, taking the rightful blow. There was no defense against such simple truth. Back at the club, Florence moved on autopilot. Her laughter forced, her steps mechanical, her heart absent. Theo watched from the corner, powerless. Every distance between them grew into a wall, and the more he tried to approach, the more she pulled away. It was like holding water in his hands. It slipped anyway, and it crushed him more than any financial loss ever could. One night, Florence stepped onto the club's back balcony. She needed to breathe away from the curious eyes. The cold air hit her face, drawing unexpected tears. Theo appeared quietly, but didn't dare touch her. "I don't want to be the cause of your pain," he said softly. "Then stop being my badly kept secret," she replied. Her words echoed like a sentence. Theo tried to reach out, but she recoiled. "Don't make promises you can't keep, Theodore." The use of his full name sounded like a wall, a reminder of the world that separated them. He stepped back, accepting temporary defeat. Florence walked inside without looking back, and the emptiness in the alley swallowed him whole. Home, Florence wrote in her notebook again. "People believe rumors because it's easier, but I know there's something true in him. The problem is it may never be enough for us both." She shut the notebook hard, trying to close the matter, but her heart refused the mind's command. And the inner battle only grew each day. Theo spent sleepless nights replaying every detail. Her smile, the club soda, the park bench. Everything felt like a dream about to fade. "I can't let her slip away," he murmured alone. But he didn't know how to prove his truth. For a man who always bought solutions, this was new and terrifying. Florence, meanwhile, tried convincing herself to move on. But every corner of the city reminded her of him. The club, the lit-up streets, even the subway. It was as if all of New York conspired to keep him close. She hated to admit it, but she missed him. Missed the simple conversations, the silent glances. Missed Theo, not Theodore. The following week, the club announced a grand charity gala. Florence learned that Theodore would be the official host. Her heart tightened at the thought of seeing him again. But part of her knew she couldn't avoid it forever. It was time to face the truth she had delayed. If he were only Theo, it might have been easy. But now, he was Theodore Lancaster before the world. The headlines gave no rest. Photos of Florence entering and leaving the club spread across local sites. "She's just another gold digger," one anonymous comment read. "Another girl chasing the Lancaster name." Florence read them unwillingly. pushed by her co-workers at the cafe. Their laughter wasn't malicious, just filled with disbelief. But to Florence, every word was a needle piercing her chest. Theo followed the news too, but reacted differently. He was used to being the target of criticism, speculation, lies. But seeing Florence dragged into it left him shaken. She hadn't chosen the spotlight, and now she was paying the price. He spent sleepless nights wondering how to protect her. But overprotection meant pushing her away further. It was an equation he didn't know how to solve. Florence began avoiding the club. She didn't want to be seen, judged, photographed. She worked at the cafe and rushed home without detours. Even the neighborhood seemed to look at her with new eyes. A neighbor asked, "Is it true what they're saying about you and him?" She smiled without answering, but inside she crumbled. She felt her simple life had been hijacked. Theo noticed her absence on club nights. An emptiness filled the dark corner where she always sat. He tried calling the cafe, but couldn't reach her. He thought about showing up unannounced, but feared making it worse. So he chose to wait, though every day weighed heavier. The silence between them was crueler than any headline, and it was becoming unbearable. One afternoon, Florence came back from the market with heavy bags. A group of teenagers recognized her. On the street, "Hey, isn't that the Billionaire's girl?" they shouted, laughing. She quickened her pace, pretending not to hear, but the words echoed like gunshots in the quiet of the block. She dropped the bags onto her table with trembling hands. "I never asked for any of this," she murmured, nearly in tears. Her aunt tried to console her, offering hot tea. "Flo, you can't let them speak for you." "But I'll never have a voice against that world, Aunt." "Then it's time to choose. Either you run or you face it." Florence stayed silent, stirring the tea without appetite. Her heart wanted to fight, but fear weighed heavier. And fear always weighs more when you're alone. Theo, in his office, canceled social commitments. He turned down interviews, avoided gala events. He wished the spotlights would dim, but knew it wasn't that simple. The business world demanded constant appearances. But now, all that mattered was finding Florence. Not as Theodore Lancaster, but as Theo, the man she had met at the bar. Finally, he decided to go to Queens. He dressed simply, leaving the bodyguards behind. He wanted to arrive as any ordinary man. He knocked on her apartment door, his heart racing. Florence opened, surprised and wary. "You shouldn't be here," she said firmly. "I needed to see you," he replied. Steadied, he stepped into the small living room, feeling out of place. Its simplicity clashed with his world of luxury. Family photos decorated peeling walls. The smell of fresh bread lingered in the air. "This is your world," he murmured, glancing around. "And you look like you don't know how to fit in it," she said. Her words struck like arrows. Theo breathed deeply, refusing to back down. "I didn't come to bring my world. I came to learn yours." Florence raised her brows, surprised by the confession. "Learning doesn't erase what's already been done, but it can build what doesn't exist yet," he said. She looked at him, unable to hide her emotion. Deep down, she wanted to believe. The next day, Theo returned to the neighborhood. No suit, no bodyguards, just him. He went into the local bakery and bought fresh bread. He greeted Florence's neighbors with a shy smile. At first, he earned suspicious stares, but slowly, the greetings were returned. He was trying, truly trying. Florence watched from the window, unseen. Part of her wanted to laugh at the improbable sight. A billionaire carrying bread in a plain paper bag. But another part felt her heart warm. It was as if he were willing to cross invisible bridges. She didn't know if it was enough, but she couldn't deny it. Something about him was real, beyond the money. That night, they met again in the small living room. Theo spoke little, but listened much. Florence told stories about the neighborhood, her family struggles. He absorbed every word like reading a rare book. "You've got more courage than any CEO I know," he said. She laughed, skeptical but flattered. For the first time in days, the laugh rang true. Still, the headlines didn't disappear. The morning paper still made Florence a target. But inside, something had begun to shift. She no longer cried at every printed word. She felt less alone than before. Theo was there, not as a magnate, but as a man. And that made a difference. They walked together one night later. Streetlights cast long shadows across the asphalt. Florence clutched her coat closed against the wind. Theo walked beside her in respectful silence. You don't have to do this, she said. Yes, I do. Not for me, but for you. His tone was simple, but heavy with truth. At the corner, Florence stopped. I don't know if I can live in that world, Theo. Then let's create a world of our own, he answered. She looked at him, surprised by his conviction. It's not that simple. It isn't. But I don't want simple. I want real. His words kept echoing in her mind. Back at the apartment, Florence wrote in her notebook. He came into my world. He tried to fit in. I still don't know if I believe it, but I know I felt it. And feeling is stronger than denial. She closed the notebook, hugging it to her chest. She knew she had reached a point of no return. Her heart had chosen long before her mind. Theo returned home late, but didn't turn on the penthouse lights. In his pocket, he kept the bakery receipt as a keepsake. It wasn't about the bread. It was about the gesture. He felt he was finally beginning to bridge the gap between them. There were still rumors, still judgment. But now there was also something. New hope. And hope was a luxury he had never bought before. Saturday dawned with the neighborhood preparing for the community event. Makeshift stands sprouted in the square, children darting between power cords. Florence helped organize boxes of donated clothes and books. It was simple work, but heavy, with meaning. The community depended on everyone's unity to make it happen. She gave herself fully to the task, trying to forget the rumors. But part of her still wondered if Theo would show up, and he did. He arrived with no suit, no luxury car, just a shirt with sleeves rolled up. He carried 2 boxes of supplies as if he'd volunteered for years. The neighbors turned to look, some suspicious, others curious. Florence froze for a second, then went back to moving. Theo approached with a timid, respectful smile. Need a hand? He asked, like any other man. She didn't answer right away, surprised by the sight. Instead, she handed him a stack of books, testing his resolve. Theo carried them to the table without complaint, following an elderly woman's directions. The woman smiled in approval, never guessing who he was. Florence watched, trying not to let it affect her. But the image of him laughing with children tugged at her heart. It was different seeing him there, outside the club, without masks. The day went on, and Theo blended deeper into the group. He helped set up tables, swept leaves, served food. People began to accept him, not for his name, but for his actions. Florence felt a mix of pride and fear. Pride at seeing him so human, so real. Fear that it might all be temporary, just an act. But deep down, something in her wanted to believe that by mid-afternoon, a little girl tugged at his shirt. "Mister, will you hold my balloon?" she asked, eyes wide. Theo laughed and held the string carefully. Florence watched from a distance, moved by the simplicity of it. It was a scene no headline or gala could ever capture. There was no magnate here, only a man learning to belong. And that changed everything. During a break, Florence and Theo sat on a bench in the square. She offered him a water bottle, and he accepted. "You didn't have to be here," she said, glancing sideways. "Yes, I did," he answered firmly. "Not to prove anything, but to be where you are." Florence looked away, her chest tightening. It was hard to resist his honesty. Some neighbors approached, curious. "Is this your friend, Florence?" an older woman asked. She hesitated, then nodded. Theo extended his hand, introducing himself simply as Theo. The woman smiled, pleased, and said, "Good people help without asking why." Florence nearly laughed at the irony of it. But deep down, she knew it was true. By nightfall, when the event ended, the square was silent. Streetlights lit scraps of paper and faded banners. Florence packed boxes while Theo folded tables. It was a simple scene, but charged with intimacy. They worked side by side, like accomplices. The silence was comfortable, without demands. Slowly, the walls between them began to fall. "You really didn't have to do all this," Florence said. "Yes, I did," he repeated, firm. "Why?" she asked, tired but curious. "Because I want to learn to live without the walls I built." She looked at him, startled by the vulnerability in his voice. Theo stared at the ground, like confessing a secret, and she felt her heart yield a little more. They walked to the corner together in silence. The night wind tousled Florence's hair. Theo watched her discreetly, memorizing every detail. "Do you think people will ever stop talking?" she asked. "Maybe they never will," he replied. "But I can choose not to listen." Florence smiled faintly, as if she'd found an answer. At her building door, Florence stopped. "What do you want from me, Theo?" she asked directly. He drew a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I want to be close. Not as Lancaster, but as a man. And if I can't handle that, then I'll wait until you can," he said without hesitation. Florence felt tears rise in her eyes. She went inside with her heart divided. Her aunt greeted her with tea, as always. "He seems to be trying," the older woman said. "But I don't know if I can believe it," Florence replied. "Flo, believing always hurts. But sometimes it's worth the pain." The words echoed in her mind for hours, and the decision still felt far away. Theo returned to his penthouse that night. But for the first time, he didn't feel alone there. The echoes of children's laughter lingered in his head. The smell of simple food, the weight of carried boxes. It all felt more real than any millionaire meeting. He knew he still had much to prove, but he also knew there was no going back. Florence lay in bed with her notebook in her lap. She wrote, "Today he was just Theo," and it was enough. She closed the pages gently, keeping the secret safe. Her heart beat fast, but not from fear. There was hope, fragile but alive, and she knew hope could change destinies. Even when the world said otherwise, Theo, stretched out on the sofa, smiled to himself. He thought of her question, "What do you want from me?" The answer still echoed, "I want to be close." It wasn't about possession nor appearance. It was about nearness, presence, truth. He closed his eyes, sure that something was being born, something no rumor could erase. Florence woke Sunday with the memory still fresh. The smell of popcorn. From the square, children's laughter, Theo's unexpected laugh. She opened the window and let the cold wind hit her face. She wondered if she'd only dreamed him so integrated into the neighborhood. But his calloused hands carrying boxes were concrete proof. Maybe he really is trying, she thought, leaning on the sill. And that possibility scared her as much as it drew her in. Theo also replayed every detail of the day before. The little girl with the balloon, the neighbors who smiled without knowing who he was. For the first time in years, he hadn't felt the need to hide. No need to flaunt, no need to protect. Simple life felt both harder and easier at the same time. Harder because there were no masks, easier because he could finally breathe. He wished that day had never ended. At the cafe, Florence was greeted by curious stares. But this time, she didn't feel so exposed. Some customers commented, "Your friend really helped yesterday." She only answered with a shy smile, though her chest warmed. It was rare to hear praise instead of rumors, and that difference gave her unexpected strength. Maybe people would start to see beyond the headlines. That night, Theo called her for the first time. His voice over the phone sounded more human, less distant. "I wanted to thank you for yesterday," he said. "You don't need to thank me for helping," she replied. "Yes, I do. You gave me the chance to be somewhere else." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken feelings. But both of them smiled, even separated by the line. Florence wrote in her notebook before bed. He didn't speak like a magnate, but like a man. His simple words still echoed in her mind. She felt that slowly, a bridge was being built. A fragile bridge, but strong enough to hold two worlds. She closed the notebook and sighed, hugging her pillow. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. The day of the charity gala had arrived. The club was transformed, gala tables, soft lights, a live orchestra. Influential guests moved about in elegant dresses and flawless suits. Florence hesitated at the door, her heart racing. She didn't want to be there, but she knew she had to. It was time to face the truth head-on. Destiny could no longer be postponed. Theo saw her walk in and held his breath. She was simple yet stunning, wearing a borrowed blue dress. She moved as if she didn't want attention, but drew it anyway. Guests stared, some curious, others judgmental. Theo descended the stairs to meet her in the hall. Their eyes met beneath the glittering chandeliers. And in that instant, nothing else mattered. He offered his hand, and she accepted, though hesitant. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice low and heavy with emotion. "I'm not sure this was a good idea," she answered. "It was the best I've ever had," he replied firmly. He led her to the center of the ballroom, in full view of everyone. It was like exposing his heart in a public square. And he did not flinch. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced into the microphone, "tonight is not about wealth or status, but about presence." Florence's eyes widened, shocked by his boldness. "People know me as Lancaster, the owner of this club. But tonight, I want to be seen only as Theo, the man who learned that love cannot be bought." A murmur rippled through the hall, charged with shock. Florence felt her legs tremble. She wasn't prepared to be part of this moment. But when he looked at her, the room fell silent. "This is Florence," he said, pointing to her. "The woman who taught me that truth is found in simple things." The ballroom erupted with whispers and judgmental glances. She drew a deep breath, fighting the urge to run. Theo squeezed her hand, grounding her. "I don't need them to accept me. I need them to accept us." Florence's heart raced, but she stood firm. The weight of judgment still loomed like a wall. But there was pride, too, in his vulnerability. No one had ever risked so much for her. And that changed everything inside her. The orchestra resumed, drowning out the whispers. Theo pulled her onto the dance floor without waiting. Florence let herself be led, still in shock. Guests watched as if it were a spectacle. But for the first time, she didn't care. Theo's eyes were her only anchor. And in that gaze, there was truth. They danced in silence, but words weren't needed. The touch of their hands, the closeness, the shared rhythm. Florence felt her heart beating in time with his. It was a choice, not chance. She could flee and return to anonymity, or she could stay and face the world with him. And in that moment, she chose to stay. When the music ended, she whispered, "You're insane for doing this in front of everyone." "Maybe," he replied with a vulnerable smile, "but I'd rather be insane than a coward." She laughed, though tears welled in her eyes. "Then I'll be insane too." And she embraced him before the entire hall. The reaction was mixed. Some applauded, others turned away. But none of that mattered anymore. Florence knew she couldn't control what people said. She could only control her choice to stand there. And she had chosen Theo, not Lancaster. The man, not the name. And that choice set her free. That night, they left the club together. Not through the red carpet, but through the side door. They laughed at the irony, like accomplices fleeing their own story. They walked streets lit by old lamps. Theo held her hand without fear. "Do you still have doubts?" he asked. "I do. But I have more courage than doubts," she said back. In Queens, they found her aunt still awake. She smiled at the sight of their joined hands. "Finally, Flo. I already knew," she said, pouring tea. Theo accepted the cup humbly, like any ordinary guest. Florence's heart warmed at the scene. There were no headlines here, only truth. And that was all she needed. Later, sitting on the small couch, they spoke softly. "I can't promise it. Will be easy," Theo said. "And I can't promise I won't doubt," she answered. "But we can promise we'll try," he finished. Florence smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. The silence that followed was stronger than any word. It was the beginning of something new. Outside, the city lived on, indifferent. But inside that small apartment, the world was different. A world built on simple gestures and bold choices. Florence wrote in her notebook before bed, "He chose me before everyone, and I chose to stay. Love is courage shaped into permanence." She closed the book with tears of gratitude. Theo fell asleep on the couch, exhausted but at peace. The distant city noise sounded like a lullaby. He dreamed of her smile, the warmth of community, of a future without masks, even if hard. Florence watched him for a moment before turning off the light. She felt at home in a way she never had before, and she knew her choice had been the right one. The next morning, the gala dominated the news. Some praised Theodore's courage to show vulnerability. Others criticized Florence, calling her the magnate's improbable girl. She read the headlines at the corner cafe, but didn't shake this time. Beside her, Theo held her hand naturally. They didn't need to say a word. The choice was already made. Together, they carried the weight and lightness of that decision. Florence returned to work at the cafe as usual. Customers came in curious, watching her every move. But when they ordered coffee, she served with the same smile as always. This time, though, there was something new in her posture, strength. She was no longer just the ordinary girl from Queens. She was the woman a powerful man had chosen to be vulnerable with. And that made her stronger than any rumor. Theo, meanwhile, stepped into a meeting that week. Investors commented on the gala, on the photos with Florence. He listened quietly, then said only, "She is part of my life, and I will not hide it." The room went silent, surprised by his clarity. It was the first time he didn't care about their opinion. and he discovered there was no greater freedom than that. That night, Theo returned to the neighborhood for dinner with Florence and her aunt. The table was small, the meal simple, soup and fresh bread. But he had never felt such peace at a dinner. They laughed over old stories, spoke of music and memories. There were no contracts, no figures, no etiquette. There was only presence, and that was all he needed. Florence looked at him and knew she had found her true home. Before bed, Florence opened her notebook once more. Today I realized it's not us against the world. It's us building a world only we understand. She closed the pages carefully, keeping them like a promise. Theo embraced her, feeling whole for the first time in years. The choice had been made, and there was no turning back. And deep down, they both knew. It was only the beginning. Asterisk in the end, Florence realized it was never about luxurious clubs, famous last names, or headlines that come and go. It was about a glass of club soda with lime, offered on an ordinary night. It was about the courage to see beyond the obvious, and to choose to stay, even when everything screamed to run. Theo discovered that behind his fortune and flawless image, there was only a man who longed to be seen. And Florence saw him, not as Lancaster, but as Theo. And in that gaze, he found what money could never buy: permanence. Amid rumors, judgment, and differences, they chose the rarest path of all. The truth that if this story touched your heart, imagine how many more are still to come here on Beyond Fortune. Comment below. Do you believe a simple gesture can change entire destinies? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Like this video if you felt every emotion with Florence and Theo. Share it with someone who needs to believe in the power of small gestures. And subscribe now to the channel so you don't miss any of the next emotional stories.